Story 1. She did an insane amount of growing up during college, including having to uproot her whole life to care for her family after her mom died suddenly. She reached out to me and others I know personally and directly addressed the bullying. We went out to lunch, she bought, and she was incredibly honest, apologizing and acknowledging what she did and why it was wrong. She's now running a successful animal rescue organization with her long-term boyfriend, and I wish her nothing but happiness. Story 2. I was bullied for years and years in middle school and high school by one particular guy. I took my dad's lawnmower in to get serviced, and look who we have here. Good old racist boy Sean walks up to the counter covered in dirt and oil and sweat. He immediately knew who I was. Funny thing is, I hated this dude for so long. I even had a vision on snatching him by his shirt over the counter and beating his face into the ground. I'm a skinny skater punk now. Nothing was said between us during that interaction, other than the services I needed. When I went to pick up the lawnmower a week later, he asked me to step outside. In my mind, I'm thinking, okay, this is it. I'm going to pummel this dude. He lit up a cigarette and for about 15 minutes apologized for how he treated me in middle school and high school. He told me about how he was brought up and he's never been as tough as he came up. After high school, he went into the military, and he was forced to work with other races. He even explained that his hatred towards people that weren't white faded away because of the Marines. He said he had been fucked over more by his own race than others, and started to think about his ideology. He is a humble guy now, with regrets, but is man enough to admit his faults. We shook hands, and even hugged. I haven't seen him in about 10 years, but if I do see him again, I'll still shake his hand. Story 3. He drove drunk, got in a wreck, and is now paralyzed from the waist down. He's still a bully, but now he's an online bully. The accident seems to have made him feel even more justified in being a prick. Story 4. I kid you not. We had a 5-foot-tall bully in our school. He gained favor with some of the bigger bullies, and I suppose that afforded him carte blanche to act like them. Anyways, a few short years after high school, he fucked with the wrong dude at a party, and they followed him home and shot him dead on his mom's front lawn. 10 days ago. Not to the same extent, but there was someone like that at my school. Short little dude who got a big man complex because of the bigger bullies he rolled with. At an after-grad party, he got jumped, and someone took a metal rod and branded his leg after they dipped the rod in the fire. Post that incident, he works for a non-profit for kids in abusive home lives. Makes me wonder what he had going on behind the scenes. Story 5. His father was caught stealing millions from the community. Dad was a wealth manager, and all his clients were friends and neighbors in a sort of small town. The family was really put through the ringer of embarrassment, and the bully was a wreck for a long time. I guess he realized all the wealth and arrogance that he grew up with was stolen from everyone he knew. I saw him years later, and it was like seeing a different person. He had changed his name, walked differently, and held himself with a different posture. We spoke for a few minutes, and it was almost like he was genuinely interested in me. He didn't go out and say sorry for what he had done, but it seemed like he wanted to, but thought it might be tacky. Maybe I'm reading too much into that interaction, but it was a little weird. It was like he had been forcing himself to be an actual nice guy. Story 6. He now owns his father's huge, massively lucrative construction company, which is exactly what he said he was going to do, and also let us know how much richer he was going to be than us. So, yeah, it sucks because it came true. Story 7. Beat a fellow dealer to death during a transaction gone bad. Sentenced for murder, but then it was somehow downgraded to manslaughter. Served about 10 years, and judging from his Facebook posts, I know his brother. He has a girlfriend, a job, and has cleaned up his act. Edit to add what happened. I just looked up the story. He was convicted of second-degree murder with depraved indifference. Then the state court of appeals changed the law interpreting the definition of the charge. The federal court vacated the conviction, finding that the defendant was factually innocent of depraved indifference murder. He agreed to plead to the lesser charge of manslaughter, so he had already served 10 years and was released after the plea to manslaughter. Story 8. I was only ever bullied in elementary school in Texas. I moved to Ohio during 5th grade. At some point in late middle school or early high school, I heard the guy who used to bully me got mad at his parents because they wouldn't let him go to a concert. So he took his dad's shotgun and himself. Story 9. He's on Facebook, constantly crying about how unfair life has been to him. He also said he won't go to our 10-year high school reunion because he was bullied by the assholes that are now organizing the reunion. When I commented and reminded him how he bullied me, he just said, "At least I didn't make you suicidal like they made me." Completely delusional. I feel bad for him. Story 10. The autistic kid beat him in Spanish class within an inch of his life, flipped him over the desk, picked this dude's body up, and slammed him, kidney first, into one of the legs. Johnny was just your normal, happy-go-lucky video game fan. We went to see the original Mortal Kombat movie in theaters when it came out. It was my second movie-going experience. I was just a newly transplanted immigrant, and Johnny was the only kid who didn't pick on me. He was cool. Johnny was heavy-set, with glasses. Juan was a gangbanger, real cholo-looking dude. He and his friends were pretty terroristic. In retrospect, I'm sure Juan had a terrible upbringing because he took it out on everyone around him. For months, he kept picking on Johnny. Months. Juan was a scary guy, and I had gotten into my share of scraps, but I wanted no part of this guy. This abuse went unchecked. Juan broke John's glasses, and it was just persistent. I don't remember all of it, other than Johnny just became more and more reclusive with time, and he was always bruised in some way, shape, or form. One day in Spanish class, Juan said something to Johnny about his mom. This was before the bell rang for class to start. This was the final straw. I remember John letting out this guttural, primal scream and lunging from his desk toward Juan. Johnny began hammer-fisting Juan all over the head, his shoulders, arms, like f***ing Goro with an MK, just unleashing everything he had on this asshole gangbanger. There came a point when Juan looked out of it, like a limp noodle, and that was when John, still possessed by this unrelenting rage, flips the desk over and underhand flips and body slams Juan into one of the legs of the desk. Juan let out this horrible cry of agony, and that was that. The teacher walks in, they call the campus police, and the rest is a blur. I don't remember what happened to John after this, as I never saw him again, but I do remember hearing from an acquaintance back several years that Juan was in jail for aggravated robbery. Guess he didn't learn his lesson. Johnny, thank you for being a friend, and for not judging me while I learned the language here and adjusted to my new life. I hope all is well with you. Story 11. Full ride scholarship through football to a D1 college. Scouted by an NFL team in high school. Just had to make it 4 years in college. Sexually assaulted a girl at the college. Went on the run. Had several warrants. Got into an argument back in hometown that led to firearm discharge. And now he's in prison. Story 12. So my bully was a guy. I'm a chick, and he was relentless. From kindergarten through middle school. He peaked in middle school. He would stick his leg out and trip me when I would walk by, then laugh. Crap like that. He annoyed everyone. Imposed on your personal space. Would tell lots about me to others so they would not like me. It really bothered me deeply because I could not understand what I had done to have someone so adamant about humiliating and hurting me publicly. Well, after middle school, he disappeared to some other school, and I slowly repressed it all and forgot about him in my active thoughts. Then I got my first apartment with a friend and a real job and went to college. I'm sitting on my new couch in my new place watching To Catch a Predator, like everyone did back then. Next up on To Catch a Predator, and I hear his name. I hear that jerk-off's name, and there he is, walking in to meet an underage girl, and he has very disgusting text convos with her. I could not believe it. I stood up and screamed aloud. I felt vindicated for the feelings of hatred and inability to forgive him as a younger girl. Justice served. Story 13. He became the CEO of the company he started working for after college. He is the chairman of the local football team and runs the beach cleanup crew every month. Always has a smile and has clearly just kept on growing up. Wasn't necessarily my bully, but this kid at my school terrorized everyone. He was an absolute shitbag. Hadn't heard anything about him for years, until I flicked on a Guy Ritchie film, and he was in it. Turns out he's now gone on to become a semi-successful actor. I actually hold no resentment, because the kid was pretty f***ed up. His mom was dead, and his father was an abusive alcoholic. So fair play to him for breaking the mold. Story 14. He's selling mobility scooters and supporting his stepchildren. He was abused at home, and I was an easy target. Back then, I fantasized about murdering him. Now, I appreciate that he was crying out for help. I'm never going to be best friends with him, but I'd shake his hand and wish him well any day. Story 15. I saw him walking in front of my family's house, certain he was passing by, while I was playing with my daughter and her cousins. He gave me a little wave, and I thought I just waved back to be nice. He messaged me later on Facebook and said he's glad I'm doing better than him. Long story short, he told me his ex-wife and him are having a serious custody battle with their kid and recently got a DUI, which got him in a deeper hole. He basically said, don't end up like him. As much as I do hope he gets better, karma really is a bitch. Story 16. My bully and his buddy drowned, and it made me sad. I'm a foreigner and didn't speak much English, and couldn't defend myself, so I just took it. This was in the late 90s, and I've moved on, but he didn't get to. Story 17. Many years after graduation, I found out that he became a local cop in the town we grew up in. It was the least surprising thing to everybody. Story 18. I do fine now. Was a stupid kid that did stupid things to a boy who didn't ask for it. We ended up being friends after he had the courage to call me out. I got suspended, and both our mothers agreed to meet and to force us to spend time together, to get to know each other. I never was more grateful to someone than those two women. My mom, obviously, but also his mom. She was a tall and fat lady, seemed really cold and severe at first glance. Understandable, as I had beaten up her son, but ended up being like a second mother to me. She showed me that even trashy humans like me can become better if given a second chance in the right conditions. And that lesson will stick with me forever. Agnes, I miss you. Story 19. The worst one I've ever met in my life never exactly had his own comeuppance. His father was wealthy from being the assistant harbor master in one of the largest fishing communities in the country, so he never exactly had to work. From what I've heard, he lives off his family's wealth while being a hobbyist photographer. His parents did get divorced, and his drug-addicted mother passed away. Another little monster, who was a year older than me, died at 21 when he fell off a 200-foot cliff while hunting with his girlfriend's family. This kid, who tormented me non-stop at Boy Scout camp, enlisted in the Army, was injured, and is now partially paralyzed, living a secluded lifestyle under his family's watch. The Boy Scout bully's close friend, who was very antagonistic, was busted 4 years ago during an FBI dark web sting operation for trafficking. He's awaiting sentencing. Story 20. I got bullied really badly, but it started simmering down in my junior year of high school when most of my bullies got jobs, started planning for college, or found themselves too busy with dating to make my life any more miserable than it already was. The exception, however, was Greg, a smirking, insufferable prick who began targeting me in junior high school because I was poor, and then expanded into a myriad of other reasons. Basically, anything he could use as an excuse to humiliate or terrorize me, along with a bunch of other kids. The last memory I have of the guy was him sitting with his buddies and making them all laugh by making fun of me and my Megadeth t-shirt. I was into heavy metal, D&D, and horror movies, which earned quite a bit of misery from Greg and his buddies. Anyway, Greg himself in his garage that year. The school allowed students to take off and go to his funeral, and I was one of a handful of folks who didn't. It's not that I was happy he killed himself. On the contrary, I thought it was an extraordinarily fucked up and terrible thing that happened. Greg made my life miserable. But I had so many people making me miserable then that I halfway believed I deserved it. He was just one violent snowflake in a blizzard of misery. What I really felt was that it would be extraordinarily hypocritical and disrespectful to show up at this guy's funeral when he hated me, and I considered him a tormentor in turn. It was crazy to me seeing guys who were regularly brutalized by Greg going to pay their respects. They were serious about it too. This wasn't just a chance to take off from school. I caught hell from some of these people for not showing up. They just couldn't understand why I thought I shouldn't attend the funeral of a person who despised me. Decades have passed now, and I still feel I did the right thing by not going. Greg's suicide was a tragedy, and I feel deep sympathy for his parents and loved ones. Even now, no matter what Greg did to me, there were people who loved him, and the kind of wound any death leaves, especially a never really heals. Story 21. My elementary school bully, in South Korea for context, continued being the bully until high school. Somehow, he ambushed and beat this untouchable student while he was alone. It turned out that the untouchable student was a Korean mafia son. Bunch of black cars park up at his apartment. Burly guys armed with metal pipes and bats would constantly waltz around the neighborhood and make the bully's family life hell. Apartment neighbors got fed up being terrified with the mafia in their neighborhood. Cops will not show up until the mafia dispersed, to the point they pressured the bully's family to move out at once. Never heard what happened after they moved. Not entirely sure why the bully did that. Maybe due to his pride? Maybe trying to prove he is the Jung, old Korean term for a student who is the toughest and strongest brawler, who'd constantly challenge or be challenged by other classes and or other schools. Story 22. Dagmar became Dagmara and now works as an admin for a paper company. Billy has been in more prisons than syphilis. David has finally quit drugs, started a YouTube channel about quitting drugs, and seems to be doing fine. Scott is still an utter and unrelenting prick of the highest order. Joe got a lobe dissection and seems to have controlled most of his upsetting and violent feelings. Story 23. He was an anti-bully. He was built like a tank, and he had crazy eyes. Everyone was afraid of him, even the biggest, baddest bullies. Yet, he would help anyone in need and hated bullying. If you got messed with, you could ask him for his help, even if you didn't know him. He was a giant with a heart of gold. Last I heard of him is that he was a private contractor in a war zone and got mixed up in smuggling. He later fell off the face of the earth. Some rumors say that he got gunned down in the middle of nowhere. Other rumors say that he is sipping pina colada on a tropical beach with no extradition treaty. Story 24. Wasn't exactly my bully, but we had a few fistfights. He bullied pretty much anyone else who was afraid of him. He started to take drugs at the age of 13 and 14. At 18, he had the face of 60 with cancer. He was in prison, rehab. Went to prison again because somehow he had a sword and destroyed a kid's bike. His parents locked him outside when they weren't at home because he stole and sold everything to have money for drugs. One day, when we were about 17 or 18, suddenly everyone stopped talking about him. We lived in the same neighborhood. The street that he lived on was quiet. People started to go outside without fear, so he's probably dead or somewhere very far away. Story 25. I had a fair number of bullies in high school, which was over 25 years ago, so I am well past that. One of them several years ago sent me a Facebook friend request. I messaged him back and said, "You made the time we were in high school together hell." He was a couple years ahead of me in school. "Why do you think I would want to friend you?" His response was, "If you're still holding on to that, you have problems." Which I replied with, "No, I don't have problems because I cut assholes like you out of my life." And then I blocked him. Story 26. My class in high school didn't have a bully, but the class ahead of me had a few. A couple of them peaked in high school, and you see them sometimes, but neither of them went on to do good things. The other one has serious health issues and is in a wheelchair due to his weight. It's really odd, but they're all overly nice when you see them. The class behind me had a group of mean girls that were absolutely awful, all very popular and attractive, and all of them, like 6, walked the stage at graduation pregnant.